Here's a guy who thinks that consciousness is magic and can't be a product of nature.
Let's talk about something so obvious we miss how weird it really is. You're conscious. You're not just reacting to stuff like a rock rolling downhill. You're aware. You experience the world. You think about your future. You worry about finals. You wonder whether this video will change your mind. You know that you're you. Here's the problem. According to atheistic naturalism, none of this was supposed to happen.
What do you mean by supposed? Of course, if there is no God, there was originally nobody to do any supposing. Maybe what you mean is that consciousness can't be a consequence of purely natural phenomena. Why not, though?
On naturalism, everything starts from unconscious matter, just particles bouncing around in a godless void. That's the foundation. No mind, no meaning, no purpose, just atoms and physics. So here's the question. Why would that kind of universe randomly cough up you?
It wouldn't, and it didn't. My existence is not a consequence of randomness. It's a product of the very non-random process of natural selection.
Consciousness isn't just one more physical process to throw under a microscope. It's not like digestion or photosynthesis.
Why not?
It's first-person experience. And no matter how many neurons you map or circuits you model, you'll never get I feel sad or I love my mom out of electricity.
Why not? I guarantee that if you take the electricity out of someone's brain, you will not hear them say, I feel sad or I love my mom. What do you think these events are? To feel an emotion is to carry out an act. What is carrying out such an act if not the brain? If the brain is not carrying out subjective experiences, then why is it that altering the brain chemically or surgically alters the experiences? If it's really the soul that's having these experiences and not the brain, how could injuries or pharmaceuticals have any effect on them? If these experiences are not the product of the brain, then why do our bodies even have brains? What is it that you think brains do? Do you think they're just there to cool the blood like the ancient Greeks believed?
There is a huge chasm between firing neurons and feeling anything at all.
How do you figure? What is doing the feeling if it isn't the neurons? If it's the soul, how does the soul do it? What even is the soul? What's it made out of? What does it even mean to say that the soul exists?
Even atheist philosophers admit this is a massive problem. Colin McGinn famously asked, how did evolution convert the water of biological tissue into the wine of consciousness?
By carrying out the act of consciousness.
So let's be real, if naturalism is true, if all that exists fundamentally is non-conscious matter governed by blind physical laws, then consciousness is not something that you would expect.
You wouldn't expect it if you were prone to compositional fallacies. There are many things that have properties that their components don't have. A single water molecule doesn't have the property of wetness, for example. Does that mean that wetness isn't a property that's supposed to emerge, or that it can't emerge from a non-wet molecule? Also, consciousness is not really even a property, it's a process. It is, in fact, like photosynthesis and digestion in that respect.
You might expect complex behavior, information processing, maybe even robots that pass Turing tests. But subjective experience, the inner what it's like to be you, has no place in that picture.
Why not? Again, conscious experiences are actions. Something has to be carrying them out. Why can't neurons be what's carrying them out?
It doesn't follow from mass, charge, or spin. Nature can simulate intelligence without consciousness, so the emergence of minds with first-person awareness looks, from the standpoint of naturalism at least, deeply anomalous.
The way machines simulate consciousness is very different from how brains actually carry it out. Large language models, for example, just index words to other words. I can easily imagine such a process lacking a first-person experience. The way brains work is they index words to concepts and sense data, and I find it very difficult to imagine a process like that lacking what philosophers call what-it-is-likeness. I don't think large language models like ChatGPT have consciousness, but if computers are ever programmed to relate words to sense data and concepts, then I would infer that they probably have some kind of first-person experience.
But if the foundation of reality is a personal mind, then the appearance of finite minds is not only unsurprising, it's what we would expect.
Why? Why would we expect an infinite mind to create finite minds?
This is what philosophers call an inference to the best explanation.
It would if it actually were the best explanation. If you're trying to explain why minds per se exist, it isn't an explanation at all to say that they come from one really big mind. Even if that were the case, it wouldn't explain the existence of that really big mind. What carries out that mind's thoughts, feelings, perceptions, etc.? Something must be carrying out these mental activities. Just as movement can't occur without something more fundamental that's doing the moving, consciousness can't occur without something more fundamental doing the thinking, feeling, perceiving, etc.
We're not just asking how consciousness works. We're asking, given that it exists, which worldview does a better job making sense of it?
The worldview that doesn't assume that thoughts and feelings can occur without anything carrying them out. That doesn't make any sense at all.
On theism, consciousness fits naturally. On atheistic naturalism, It's a mystery bordering on a miracle.
No, it isn't. Given that consciousness is an activity, something has to be carrying out this activity. Given that altering the brain alters consciousness, the simplest, most probable explanation is that the brain is what's carrying out this activity.
Now, some people will push back and say, you're just invoking God because you don't understand consciousness. That's just God of the gaps. But that misses the point completely. This isn't about what we don't know. It's about what we do know. Consciousness is real. It's not a blank in our knowledge. It is a full-blown data point. And the question is, which worldview actually predicts the data?
Theism doesn't predict consciousness. It assumes the existence of a consciousness as a given. That's not a prediction.
Appealing to God here isn't filling a gap. It's just recognizing that theism gives us a world where minds make sense, where they're actually expected.
Where they're presupposed rather than explained.
Naturalism, on the other hand, gives us physics, particles, equations, and somehow that's supposed to spit out subjective experience?
No, it's not supposed to any more than it's supposed to spit out digestion or photosynthesis. These are things that can result from physics, not things that are supposed to result from physics.
That's not a pathway, that's a leap.
Natural selection has selected for the ability of an organism to model its environment and make predictions about its behavior. If it's a leap for you to see such a process as having a what-it-is likeness, then you just lack imagination.
And while critics throw around God of the gaps, they quietly lean on their own version. Naturalism of the gaps. They have no mechanism, no model, just blind faith that science will one day stumble into a solution.
Science already has a solution. Consciousness is already explained by science. Some philosophers still insist that there is a hard problem of consciousness that hasn't been solved yet, but here's Daniel Dennett to explain why there is no such problem.
One time I had a very interesting discussion with Tom Nagel about this. Tom, who wrote What Is It Like to Be a Bat? And he said, well, neuroscience could give you perfect correlation between brain events and conscious events, but it wouldn't explain the correlation. And I said, okay, let's explore that. Can you give me an example where it's not just correlation? And he said, yes. Chemists, physicists can tell you, as it were, why water is wet. The molar macro property of wetness can be explained, not just correlated with, but explained in terms of the bonds of the water molecules and so forth. I said, okay, good. That's an example of explanatory correlation. I said, now, how about when industrial chemists create a new polymer that's never been seen on the globe before? It's an artificial polymer. And before they've even made it, they're telling you what its tensile strength is, what its color is, whether it's going to be brittle or stretchy, and so forth. I said, you know, they can do that sometimes. I said, would that be explanatory? And he said, yes. I said, okay, well, I think we've already entered the age of explanatory neuroscience. And I showed him the Ramachandran and Gregory motion capture experiment, where they predicted a brand new illusion that had never been seen anywhere before, and they predicted it on the basis of their knowledge of the organization of the visual cortex in terms of the blobs and the interblobs, and the parts that are motion sensitive and the parts that are have a low spatial resolution. And I said, isn't that exactly analogous to what the chemists do? Namely, these folks knew enough about how the brain worked so they could say, we'll prove that we know how the brain works because we will put together a circumstance which creates an illusion never before seen, and we'll predict it in advance. Yeah. So, I mean, that's why I think there's no hard problem.
I imagine people who believe that consciousness is some woo-woo phenomenon would reject this as an explanation. I think this is because they have weird expectations of what an explanation of how the brain carries out consciousness would be like. They don't see correlations as explanations because when you look at an fMRI or an EEG of the brain feeling an emotion, for example, you don't see the emotion, meaning you don't experience that emotion yourself. For some reason, they think that in order for these brain processes to truly explain emotion, witnessing them should cause their brains to undergo the same processes. This seems to me to be a very silly thing to expect from an explanation.
Now, let's map out some of the main options. First, there's reductive materialism that says consciousness just is brain activity. Neurons fire and poof, experience.
That's like saying that the explanation for photosynthesis is chloroplasts use sunlight to catalyze the creation of glucose and poof, photosynthesis. Any perfectly sensible causal relationship can be made to sound silly when you add the word poof.
But that's just correlation masquerading as explanation.
When correlation can be used to make accurate predictions, as Dennett explained, then it is, in fact, an explanation. We can predict what kind of experiences a person will have based on the changes we make to the brain. Why would this be the case if the brain isn't what's carrying out the experiences? If these correlations are not causal, then what explains them? Why are these correlations even occurring? Are the causal arrows pointing in the opposite direction and the experiences are causing the brain activity rather than the other way around? Why would that happen? Are these correlations purely coincidental? Given how tight the correlations are, this seems very improbable.
Why should electricity be conscious of anything?
It's not. It carries out the process of consciousness. Consciousness is not a property. It's an activity. It is the use of sense data to create models of the environment.
Why isn't your brain just a cold unconscious calculator?
Because it uses sense data to create models of the environment.
Strong Emergent says consciousness pops out when matter gets complex enough.
Complexity is not the issue. Whether the brain makes models from sense data is the issue.
But that just labels the problem without solving it. Why does complexity create awareness at all?
It doesn't necessarily. Awareness is the modeling of sense data.
And if it adds something new, like mental properties with causal power, then you've left physicalism behind.
I see no reason to believe in mental properties with causal power.
Panpsychism says all matter has some degree of consciousness. That avoids the something from nothing problem, but under atheism, why would a mindless universe be made of proto-minds?
If panpsychism is true, which I don't think it is, the universe would not be mindless.
That kind of reality fits way better under theism, where consciousness is there from the start.
Which is why theism can't explain consciousness. According to theism, consciousness just exists without cause. Even if God exists by logical necessity, which I'm not convinced is the case, I still don't see why it's logically necessary that such a being be conscious.
So when you're comparing worldviews, the one that makes the data more probable is the better explanation.
Simply saying that consciousness exists because it was created by a bigger consciousness is not at all an explanation of why consciousness exists per se. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.